The grand chamber of the Galactic Assembly buzzed with the usual mixture of sounds. Clicks, whistles, and electronic pulses filled the air as representatives from 47 different species gathered for another session. The massive circular room stretched wide enough to hold 3,000 beings, each seated in sections designed for their specific biology. Ambassador Taman's seat was empty. Councilor Jymeth of the Vrixian Empire noticed it first. His 3 eyes blinked in sequence as he scanned the human section. All 20 seats allocated to Earth sat vacant. This had never happened before. Humans always arrived early, often helping technicians test the translation systems before sessions began. Jymeth activated his communication device and sent a query to the human embassy. No response came back. He tried again, adding an urgent priority flag. Still nothing. A small flutter of concern moved through his chest cavity. "Perhaps they are simply late," said Councilor Dren, a floating gas form being who seemed perpetually bored with assembly proceedings. "Let us begin without them. They never contribute much anyway." The session started. Trade disputes were discussed. Border agreements were reviewed. Resource allocation was debated. The chamber moved through its agenda with practiced efficiency. Every few minutes, Jymeth glanced at the empty human seats. Something felt wrong. During the scheduled break, Jymeth decided to visit the human embassy himself. He traveled through the station corridors, past the various species going about their business. The human embassy occupied a modest section on level 14, nowhere near the prestigious upper levels where powerful species maintained their headquarters. The doors to the embassy opened automatically. Jymeth stepped inside and froze. The space was empty. Completely, utterly empty. Desks stood bare. Walls showed rectangular patches where pictures and displays had hung. The air recyclers hummed quietly, but no other sound existed. Every piece of furniture remained, but all personal items were gone. On the main desk sat a neatly stacked pile of assembly-issued equipment, communication devices, security badges, data tablets, all organized by type and labeled with inventory codes. Jymeth's breathing quickened. He rushed through the other rooms. The residence quarters, the conference halls, the small cafeteria where human staff once gathered, all empty. All clean. All abandoned with unsettling precision. He immediately contacted station security. Within an hour, reports flooded in from across assembly space. The human delegation on Kelsa Prime had vanished. The human trade mission on Praxis 3 was gone. The research team on Station Kepler 7 had disappeared. Everywhere, the pattern repeated. Empty facilities. Returned equipment, no messages, no explanations. The humans had left. Emergency sessions were called. Counselors argued about what this meant. The Mathronian representative insisted it was an insult that demanded investigation. The Krell ambassador suggested the humans had finally realized they didn't belong among superior species. Dren the gas being laughed, stating that humanity's departure saved the assembly the trouble of eventually asking them to leave. But Jymeth couldn't shake his unease. He spent the next 3 days reviewing records, trying to understand how an entire species could vanish so completely. The data he found astonished him. Every human colony had been evacuated in perfect synchronization. Not just the diplomats and officials, but all humans everywhere in assembly space. The mining crews on asteroid belt Zeta 9, the medical staff on orbital hospitals, the engineers maintaining deep space relay stations, the teachers at intercultural schools, millions upon millions of humans, all gone within a 72-hour window. The logistics required for such an operation defied belief. Moving that many people across such vast distances without anyone noticing the preparation should have been impossible. Yet they had done it. What disturbed Jymeth most was the silence. No declaration of independence. No list of grievances. No demands or threats. They had simply packed their belongings, cleaned their spaces, returned what wasn't theirs, and left. It was the most polite mass exodus in galactic history. "Good riddance," declared Counselor Vex during an assembly session 1 week after the discovery. They were always so quiet, so boring. They took jobs no proper species would want. Let them go play civilizations somewhere else. Many counselors agreed. A few expressed mild concern about the suddenness of the departure, but most seemed relieved. Humanity had always been an odd fit in the assembly. They weren't particularly strong or fast. They didn't have natural weapons or impressive technology when they first joined. They had simply been adequate, unremarkable, easy to overlook. The assembly voted to officially note humanity's departure in the records and move on with normal business. But then, 5 days after that vote, the FTL communication network experienced its first major failure in 60 years. Messages between systems began arriving corrupted or not at all. Technicians scrambled to identify the problem. On Praxis 3, agricultural supervisors noticed the main irrigation system behaving strangely. Water pressure fluctuated wildly. Some fields flooded while others dried out. At the medical research facility orbiting Kelser Prime, a pandemic monitoring system crashed. Restart attempts failed repeatedly, triggering quarantine protocols across 3 systems. These incidents seemed unrelated. Random technical problems that occasionally plagued any large organization. The assembly's maintenance departments began working on solutions. None of them yet understood what was coming. None of them realized that the quiet, boring, unremarkable humans had been holding everything together. And now those hands were gone. 3 weeks after humanity's departure, the Galactic Assembly faced its first crisis. The FTL communication network, which connected all 47 member species across hundreds of systems, was collapsing. Messages took days instead of hours to transmit. Some didn't arrive at all. 3 major trade negotiations fell apart because parties couldn't communicate reliably. Counselor Ventar, the Mathronian who oversaw technological infrastructure, convened an emergency meeting of network engineers. Representatives from 8 different species gathered in a conference room, their various forms of frustration evident. "The primary relay nodes are destabilizing," explained a Krull technician, its mandibles clicking nervously. "We've tried standard repair protocols, but nothing works. The entire system architecture is more complex than our documentation suggests. Who designed this network?" Ventar asked. The room fell silent. A young Rixian engineer finally spoke up, his voice hesitant. "According to the records, the original design was created by assembly engineers 70 years ago. But the optimization protocols, the load balancing systems, the redundancy networks, those were implemented later by various contractors." "What contractors?" Ventar demanded. The engineer pulled up employment records. His 3 eyes widened. "Sir, 73% of the network maintenance staff over the past 50 years were human." Ventar felt something cold settle in his processing core. "Find their documentation, their repair manuals, their system designs." They found files, thousands of files, but they were incomplete, written in technical shorthand that assumed knowledge the remaining engineers didn't possess. Humans had a way of solving problems that didn't match standard galactic approaches. They used strange mathematical principles, unconventional logic patterns, and something they called intuitive engineering. That apparently made perfect sense to them but baffled everyone else. The network continued to degrade. 2 more relay nodes failed. The assembly's ability to govern itself was crumbling. On Praxis 3, the situation was worse. The agricultural world fed 17 different systems. Its massive irrigation network watered crops across 3 continents. But the system was failing catastrophically now. Supervisor Krellick stood in the central control room, staring at displays that showed disaster spreading across the planet. Zone 7 was flooding. Zone 12 had no water at all. Zone 23's pumps were running backwards somehow. Who maintained this system? Krellick roared. A frightened assistant brought up the records. Engineer Hyam Woo, sir. Human. He ran the irrigation systems for 34 years. He retired 8 months ago and left the planet 6 weeks ago. He must have left instructions. They found Hyam Woo's documentation, detailed schematics, maintenance schedules, and repair procedures. But his design philosophy was unlike anything the current engineers understood. He had created a system that worked with the planet's natural water cycles instead of against them. It was brilliant, elegant, and completely impossible to modify using standard engineering approaches. Just follow his procedures exactly, Krellick ordered. They tried. But Hyam Woo's notes assumed knowledge of his underlying design principles. Without understanding why the system worked the way it did, the engineers couldn't adapt to new problems. When a pump failed in an area not covered by the documentation, they didn't know how to compensate. Crop failures began within days. Famine projections appeared within weeks. The medical crisis hit hardest at the pandemic monitoring facility orbiting Kelser Prime. Dr. G1 had run the facility for 15 years. Ever since a deadly plague nearly wiped out the Kelser species, she had redesigned their entire disease surveillance system, creating something that caught outbreaks before they spread. Now that system was dead, and a new virus was emerging on Kelser Prime's southern continent. Chief Medical Officer Tralvin desperately reviewed G1's files. She had left everything: her algorithms, her data models, her response protocols. But her mathematical notation was something special. She had apparently developed her own hybrid system. Combining human statistical methods with Kelser biological modeling. Nobody could read it. Get a human mathematician, Tralvin ordered. There are no humans left in assembly. Space, his assistant reminded him. Quietly, Tralvin stared at the incomprehensible equations on his screen. Somewhere in these symbols was the answer to stopping the virus spreading below. Somewhere in this alien mathematics was the key to saving millions of lives. He couldn't find it. Nobody could dot the virus spread. Quarantines were implemented too late. The death toll began climbing. Assembly Coordinator Velthur watched reports flood his office. Infrastructure failures across 20 systems. Economic disruptions affecting hundreds of worlds. Medical emergencies. Agricultural collapses. Communication breakdowns. He was old for his species, experienced in crisis management. But this was different. This wasn't war or natural disaster. This was something insidious. The slow realization that the foundation everyone stood on had quietly disappeared. Velthur began his own investigation. He traveled to stations and worlds where humans had worked. He interviewed thousands of beings from dozens of species. A pattern emerged that made his blood run cold. Humans had been everywhere. Not in leadership positions, not in prestigious roles, but in the essential, unglamorous work that kept civilization functioning. They fixed things. They maintained systems. They solved small problems before they became large ones. They filled gaps that other species didn't even notice existed, and they had done it so quietly that nobody realized how much they mattered. On Station Kepler 7, Velthur learned about young Seek. The station manager described him as just a maintenance worker, very reliable, always on time. But young Seek's logs revealed something extraordinary. He had discovered a critical flaw in the station's reactor, designed 9 years ago, a cascade failure risk that could destroy the entire structure. rather than report it and cause panic. Young-Sik had simply fixed it. Every 8.3 hours, for 9 years, he had applied a manual correction that prevented the cascade. He had done this through sickness, through holidays, through personal tragedy. He had trained no replacement because he assumed someone would eventually fix the underlying problem properly. Nobody had. Now, without Young-Sik's constant intervention, the reactor was becoming unstable. The station had 6 weeks before mandatory evacuation. Maybe less. Valther's investigation continued. Every world revealed similar stories. Humans solving problems, maintaining systems, doing work that others considered beneath them. Not because they were forced to, but because someone had to do it, and they were willing. The assembly had never thanked them. Had never even noticed that now the bills were coming due and nobody knew how to pay them. Valther's investigation took him to 40 different worlds over 3 months. What he found painted a picture that shamed him to his core. On the research station orbiting the gas giant Helion-4, he met Director Qualinex, who seemed annoyed by the questions. "Yes, we had a human on staff," Qualinex said dismissively. "How? One." She was a translator. Nothing special. She processed communication between our research teams. Valther checked the records. 12 different species worked at this station, studying the gas giant's unique atmospheric properties. Since Hay-1's departure, research had completely stopped. Why? Valther asked. Qualinex's face darkened. The teams can't work together anymore. The Rixians are offended by how the Krell communicate. The Mithronians find the Talvex research methods disrespectful. We've had 3 formal complaints and 2 physical altercations in the past month. But you have translation software. Software translates words, Qualinex admitted reluctantly. Hay-1 translated meaning. She understood context. When a Krell researcher clicked rapidly, she knew if it meant excitement or anger. When a Vrixian spoke formally, she knew if they were being polite or sarcastic. She prevented misunderstandings before they happened. Valther reviewed Hay-1's work logs. She had mediated an average of 15 disputes per week. Small things mostly. Clarifying intentions. Explaining cultural contexts. Making sure everyone understood not just what was said, but what was meant. Did you thank her? Valther asked. Qualinex looked uncomfortable. She was just doing her job. Now, without her, the entire research station was tearing itself apart over miscommunications. 3 different species had withdrawn their funding. Decades of scientific cooperation were collapsing. The pattern repeated everywhere. Valther traveled to the construction yards above Praxis 7, where a Krell foreman named Tekkener complained about falling behind schedule. We're trying to finish the orbital platform. But nothing works right anymore, Tekkener explained. The structural calculations keep failing validation. We have to redesign everything multiple times. Who did your calculations before? Don Hyan, human construction foreman. Worked here for 20 years. Tekkener pulled up old project files. Look at this. He designed load-bearing frameworks for 40% of our major structures. We thought we understood his methods, but we were wrong. Valther studied the designs. They were elegant, using principles of distributed stress that seemed almost intuitive. But when the current engineers tried to apply the same principles to new projects, the calculations didn't work. He was using something humans call systems thinking, explained a young engineer. They don't just calculate individual components. They understand how everything works together. How stress flows through structures like water through pipes. We're trying to learn it, but it's like trying to see a color we don't have eyes for. Dong Hyan had never written papers about his methods. Had never taught formal classes. He had simply done the work, and everyone assumed it was easy because he made it look easy. Now, construction across 12 systems was grinding to a halt. On the medical ship Mercy of Stars, Velthor met nurse supervisor Drennick, who seemed exhausted beyond measure. "We're losing patients we should be saving," Drennick said quietly. "Our success rates have dropped 30% since the humans left. Why? You still have the same equipment, the same medications." "Yes, but we lost our best diagnosticians." Drennick pulled up personnel files. Sujin Kyung-soo Jae-hee. 3 human nurses. We thought they were just adequate, competent, but unremarkable. Then they left, and we realized what they were doing. Drennick showed Velthor the medical records. The humans had been catching problems early, noticing small symptoms that indicated larger issues. They had a strange ability to recognize patterns, to see connections between symptoms that seemed unrelated. Sujin once diagnosed a Mithronian patient with a rare blood disorder because she noticed he blinked differently, Drennick said. The tests hadn't shown anything yet, but she insisted we check. She was right. The early treatment saved his life. How did she know? She said it was just human intuition. The ability to notice things that seem wrong even when you can't explain why. Drennick's voice cracked. We mocked her for it. Called it unscientific. Now patients are dying because we can't see what she saw. Velthor's documentation grew thicker. Every world added more stories. The education center on Kelser Prime, where teacher Minseo had somehow gotten rival species children to cooperate and even become friends. After she left, the school had to install barriers between different species because conflicts escalated so quickly. The agricultural research station, where botanist Chan Wu had been developing drought-resistant crops for 15 years. His notes were thorough, but his instinct for plant biology was something nobody could replicate. 3 crop development projects had failed since his departure. The diplomatic corps, where cultural liaison Yoonji had quietly prevented 2 wars simply by helping ambassadors understand each other better. She had never taken credit, never asked for recognition. She had just done her work, and conflicts resolved themselves around her. The Deep Space Monitoring Network, where technician Sang-hoon had maintained early warning systems for asteroid threats. His replacement couldn't understand his optimization algorithms. 2 planets had already suffered minor impacts that should have been predicted. On and on it went. Thousands of humans. Millions of small contributions. The invisible foundation of civilization. Velthor returned to the assembly with his report. The chamber filled with counselors who were now much less confident than they had been 3 months ago. Infrastructure continued crumbling. Economic losses mounted daily. Medical emergencies multiplied. I have interviewed over 4,000 beings from 38 different worlds, Velthor announced. I have reviewed employment records, project files, and personal testimonies. My conclusion is simple and terrible. We didn't just lose a member species. We lost the people who made everything work. Ridiculous. Counselor Vex protested. They were laborers, technicians. We can replace them. With whom? Velthor asked quietly. Which species will take the jobs we considered beneath us? Which of our people will maintain systems instead of designing them? Which of our engineers will do the boring, repetitive work that keeps stations running? The chamber fell silent. The humans never asked to be special, Velthor continued. They just did what was needed. And we never noticed because we were too busy being proud. Nobody argued. The evidence surrounded them, growing worse every day. The assembly had built a magnificent civilization on foundations they never looked at. Now those foundations were gone, and everything was beginning to fall. 6 months after humanity's departure, the Galactic Assembly authorized an emergency search operation. They had to find the humans. They had to bring them back. The alternative was watching their entire civilization slowly collapse. Fleet Commander Jexler led the expedition. 30 ships, the finest vessels the Assembly could spare during the ongoing crisis. Their mission was simple: find Earth, find the humans, negotiate their return. The journey to the Sol system took 3 weeks through the FTL lanes. Jexler spent that time reviewing everything known about humanity. It wasn't much. Humans had joined the Assembly 120 years ago, offering friendship and cooperation. They had been given membership, assigned tasks, and largely ignored ever since. They were so unremarkable, Jexler's second officer commented. How could unremarkable beings be so essential? Jexler had no answer. The fleet emerged from FTL at the edge of the Sol system. Sensors immediately began scanning for the third planet, Earth, home to billions of humans. The sensors found nothing. Run the scan again, Jexler ordered. They did. Same result. The third planetary orbit was empty. Not destroyed. There was no debris field, no radiation signatures. The planet was simply gone. Check the fourth planet, Mars. They had colonies there. Mars was gone too. So were the moons of Jupiter, where humans had built mining stations. The asteroid belt settlements had vanished. Every trace of human civilization in the Sol system had disappeared. This is impossible, the sensor officer whispered. You can't move planets. The energy required would be beyond anything we thought they were capable of, Jexler finished quietly. They searched the entire system, found nothing except a single beacon orbiting where Earth used to be. It transmitted on standard assembly frequencies, clearly meant to be found. Jexler had the message downloaded. It was a recorded video, time-stamped to the day before the Exodus began. A human appeared on screen, middle-aged, wearing simple diplomatic robes. The file identified him as Ambassador Taemin, Earth's chief representative to the Assembly. Jexler played the message. Taemin's face was calm, perhaps a little sad. He spoke in perfect galactic common, his voice measured and polite. To whoever finds this message, greetings. I am Ambassador Taemin of Earth. If you're seeing this, you've come looking for us. I want you to understand why we left. We came to the Galactic Assembly 120 years ago with hope in our hearts. We had finally proven we weren't alone in the universe. We dreamed of partnership, of friendship, of learning and growing together with other species. We offered our hands in greeting. You gave us hammers and told us to build. We offered our minds to solve problems. You gave us your broken systems and walked away. We offered friendship. You gave us tolerance, and only on your better days. We're not warriors. We never wanted to be conquerors. But we're not fools either. We saw how you looked at us, how you dismissed us, how you assumed our willingness to help meant we were content to be your servants. We built your worlds because someone had to, and we were raised to believe honest work has dignity. We healed your sick because we couldn't stand by while being suffered. We educated your children because we believe every young mind deserves a chance. We kept your stations running because we understood that small failures lead to large disasters. We asked only for respect. We received assignments. We asked for partnership. We received condescension. We asked to be heard. We received silence. I want you to know something important. We're not angry with you. Anger requires energy we'd rather spend on better things. We're simply tired. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being useful but never valued. Tired of doing essential work that you considered beneath you. 50 years ago, we started planning our departure. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. We realized we were building our lives on the scraps of your respect. And we deserve better. While you focused on grand projects and political prestige, we focused on what we do best: logistics, engineering, the boring, essential work of making impossible things possible. We built new drives, new ships, new technologies. We learned to move worlds because that's what we needed to do. We found a new place, far beyond your borders. A place where we can build our own civilization on our own terms. Where our children won't be raised to accept crumbs of respect. Where our work will be valued because we value it ourselves. We wish you well. We truly do. We hope you learn from this. We hope you realize that civilizations aren't built by grand gestures, but by countless small acts of care and competence. We hope you learn to value the people who do the essential work, whatever species they belong to. But we won't be coming back. We've spent a century building your dreams. Now we're going to build our own. Goodbye. Take care of yourselves. You'll have to now. The message ended. Taemin's face faded to black. Jexler sat in silence. Around the bridge, crew members looked at each other uncomfortably. Some looked ashamed, others angry. Most just looked lost. "Sir," the communications officer said hesitantly, "should I search for any indication of where they went?" Jexler shook his head. "They moved entire planets. If they don't want to be found, we won't find them." The fleet returned to assembly space with their devastating news. Not only were the humans gone, but they had capabilities the assembly never imagined. While the assembly focused on weapons and warfare, humans had mastered something more fundamental, the ability to build and move and create on scales that made them effectively untouchable. Velthor watched Taemin's message 3 times. Each viewing hurt more than the last. The calm politeness made it worse somehow. The humans weren't screaming accusations or making threats. They were simply explaining, as if to children who might understand eventually. "We failed them," Velthor said to the empty room. "We completely, utterly failed them." The assembly convened to discuss options. Some counselors demanded military action, claiming the humans had stolen assembly resources. Others pointed out that beings capable of moving planets could probably defend themselves quite well. Most just looked tired and defeated. "We need them to come back," Counselor Ventar stated plainly. "Our infrastructure is collapsing. Our economy is failing. We need their expertise. Why would they return?" Velthor asked. "What could we possibly offer them that they don't already have?" Nobody had an answer. The assembly, which had ruled 47 species across hundreds of worlds, had been humbled by the quiet departure of the beings they considered least important. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They had built an empire on foundations they never valued. Now they would watch it crumble and finally understand what they had lost. 2 years after humanity's departure, the Galactic Assembly stood at the edge of complete collapse. 30 systems had been abandoned due to failing infrastructure that nobody could repair. The FTL communication network functioned at only 40% capacity, and even that required constant emergency maintenance. The economy had crashed so badly that 3 species had withdrawn from the assembly entirely, choosing to focus on their own survival. Medical facilities across assembly space reported crisis-level shortages of qualified staff. Agricultural worlds struggled with outdated irrigation systems. Construction projects sat half-finished. Research stations shut down. Educational centers closed. The great civilization that had once united 47 species was fragmenting, and everyone knew why. 2 factions emerged within the assembly. The first, led by Councilor Vex and supported by military-focused species, demanded that humanity be found and forced to return. They claimed the humans had stolen assembly knowledge and resources. They wanted justice, restitution, and most of all, they wanted their comfortable lives back. "We gave them everything," Vex argued during one heated session. "We allowed them into our assembly. We gave them jobs and purpose. They owe us their loyalty." The second faction, smaller but growing, argued differently. These counselors, led by Velther, believed the assembly needed to accept responsibility and rebuild itself. "We gave them nothing," Velther countered. "We took their labor and gave them contempt. We used their skills and gave them invisibility. They owe us nothing." The debates grew violent. Physical altercations broke out in the assembly chamber. Species blamed each other for humanity's departure. Old rivalries resurfaced. The unity that had defined the assembly for centuries shattered. On the orbital station above Kelser Prime, the situation reached a critical point. The pandemic that had started 2 years ago had killed millions. Without Dr. G1's monitoring systems, 3 more diseases had emerged and spread before anyone noticed. The Kelser species faced possible extinction. A young Kelser? Scientists named Trulvan no relation to the chief. Medical officer who had died in the pandemic spent 18 hours every day trying to decode G1's mathematics. She had dedicated 2 years to understanding the human doctor's work. Late one night, exhausted and desperate, Trulvan finally saw it. The patterns clicked into place. G1's notation wasn't just different, it was beautiful. She had created a system that treated diseases as living patterns instead of isolated incidents. She had understood that stopping pandemics required seeing connections nobody else noticed. Trulvan applied the principles, created a new monitoring algorithm based on G1's approach. It worked. For the first time in 2 years, they caught an outbreak before it spread, but it was too late to save millions who had already died. Too late to prevent the devastation. Trulvan sat in her empty lab and cried, mourning for all the beings who could have been saved. If only her people had valued the human doctor while she was there. Similar realizations occurred across assembly space. Engineers finally understood Donghayan's construction principles, but only after dozens of structures had collapsed. Technicians decoded Youngseek's reactor maintenance protocols, but not before Station Kepler 7 had to be evacuated, leaving thousands homeless. They were learning. Slowly, painfully, they were beginning to understand what humans had tried to teach them through quiet example. But the cost of learning was devastating. Velther, now elderly, even by his species' long lifespan, prepared for what he knew would be his final speech to the assembly. The chamber was half empty. Many species could no longer afford to maintain diplomatic missions. The grand room that once buzzed with 47 different forms of communication now echoed with emptiness. He stood at the central podium, looking at the scattered representatives of what remained of galactic unity. "My fellow counselors," he began, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. "We have spent 2 years debating who is to blame for our current crisis. We have argued about whether humans had the right to leave, whether we should force them to return, whether we can survive without them. All of these debates miss the fundamental truth we must accept. We called them ordinary. We called them unremarkable. We gave them the work we deemed beneath us and never noticed when that work became the foundation of everything we are. The humans didn't conquer us with weapons. They didn't need to. They simply showed us what we truly valued, and it wasn't them. I've spent 2 years investigating humanity's role in our civilization. I've read thousands of reports, interviewed tens of thousands of beings. I've seen the pattern clearly now. Every system they touched worked better. Every problem they addressed got solved. Every conflict they mediated found resolution. But we never thanked them. We never even saw them. They were the invisible workers, the unremarkable helpers, the beings who did essential work while we congratulated ourselves on our grand achievements. The humans gave us a gift by leaving. They proved that civilizations don't collapse from war or disaster, but from forgetting that every person matters. Every role has dignity. Every quiet contribution builds the foundation that everything else rests upon. We learned this too late. We can't bring them back, and we shouldn't try. They deserve better than us. They deserve the civilization they're building for themselves, where their work is valued and their contributions are seen. The question now is what we do next. Do we continue fighting among ourselves, blaming each other for what we all did together? Or do we accept the hard lesson they taught us and try to become worthy of the civilization they helped us build? I propose we do something humans would appreciate. Something simple, practical, and honest. I propose we start doing the work ourselves. All of it. The boring parts. The repetitive parts. The parts we thought were beneath us. I propose we learn humility. Velther paused, looking around the chamber. Some counselors looked ashamed. Others angry. A few nodded slowly. Our children's children may rebuild what we had, he continued quietly. Perhaps they'll do it with the humility the humans tried to teach us. Perhaps they'll create a civilization where all beings are valued, where all work has dignity, where contributions are measured by impact rather than prestige. Or perhaps we were only ever great because humans were here, quietly making us better than we deserve to be. Perhaps we'll spend generations learning to do poorly what they did excellently. Either way, we must try. The human era is over. What we do with what they taught us, that's up to us now. Velther stepped down from the podium. No vote was called. No formal resolution passed. But something shifted in the chamber. A recognition, painful but necessary, of truths they had avoided for too long. The assembly would survive. Barely. It would take decades to recover, even partially. Some things would never be recovered. The easy assumption that they were the galaxy's best and brightest had died permanently. Centuries later, the Galactic Assembly existed as a shadow of its former glory. Young beings learned about the human era in history classes, studying it as the golden age their ancestors had squandered through pride and blindness. They learned about young Sik, who prevented a reactor cascade for 9 years through quiet dedication. About Hei-Wan, who translated not just words but understanding. About Haiyan Wu, who designed irrigation systems in harmony with nature. About Ji-1, whose mathematics could have saved millions if only someone had valued it in time. The humans became legends. Stories told to children about the beings who were so essential they became invisible. So valuable they were overlooked, so patient they gave 100 years before finally walking away. And somewhere, far beyond the borders of known space, humanity thrived. They built cities on worlds they had moved themselves. They created systems that worked because they understood the value of every component. They raised children who never had to accept being invisible. They never looked back. They never needed to. They had finally gone home to a place where home meant being valued for who they were, not just what they could do. Where their quiet competence wasn't a curse, but a gift they gave to themselves. The assembly had learned its lesson, but the teachers were gone, building their own lessons now, and they were building them beautifully.